Welcome back to episode 4 of Northern Words, the podcast where I claim to be traversing Britain, but in reality I'm just sweating on a spin bike. This week we're still at sea, drifting past Fair Isle's knitwear empire, North Ronaldsay's seaweed eating sheep, and enough lighthouses to keep the Stevenson family in royalties for generations. Along the way, expect Spanish shipwrecks, puffins with attitude, and a golf ball incident that nearly ended this podcast before it even began. Think National Geographic meets Casualty, narrated by somebody who's only just discovered the joys of Excel conditional formatting. Stage 4. Have I got Ewes for you? Starting with stage stats for this week, the total distance covered so far is 222 kilometres, which is 7.7% of the 4-year journey. In real life, I covered the 55.5 kilometres for this stage between the 19th and the 23rd of July. And my current position is actually 5 days ahead of schedule, which means I'm either fitter than expected or I've mistyped something in the spreadsheet. Probably that. IRL. Hit me with your best shot. Another fruitful few days have nudged me a little further ahead of my 5 miles a day average, though I have to remind myself this whole endeavour is quite literally a marathon, not a sprint. Actually, scratch that. A marathon is 42.195 kilometres long. I'm hopefully clocking up over 68 times that across the year, and even a single stage on this challenge is longer than a marathon by around 13 kilometres. And yes, I know including cycling mileage doesn't exactly make me an ultra athlete, but according to government figures, the average person walked and cycled for a combined 438 kilometres in 2023. My target is 6.5 times that. So I may not be breaking records, but I am breaking insoles. I've also just realised that my arithmetic pedantry here also doubles as a neat illustration of the modern use of the word literally, which I persist in using despite finding it mildly infuriating. Just use figuratively, man. No need to inflate the stakes. I'm literally dying of boredom doesn't mean your living room has become a crime scene, especially if you're still alert enough to live tweet your despair. Then again, I'm figuratively dying of boredom doesn't quite pack the same punch on TikTok. So we're stuck in a cultural standoff, grammar versus melodrama. I stand with grammar. Anyway, in this literal 31.5% more than the length of a marathon stage, I walked, golfed, and did my first indoor spin bike session in a while. But the standout moment came during what should have been a routine weekday round of golf with friends. We were ambling round the course, alternating between shots that made us question why we play golf at all, and the occasional strike Rory McIlroy might begrudgingly tolerate, when, somewhere on the 10th, I was abruptly reminded that golf is, at its core, a sport involving airborne weaponry and questionable aim. To be precise, I was struck square in the chest by a golf ball from the adjacent 9th hole at a speed my ribs estimated as a fair tilt. Somewhere between 40 to 60 miles an hour according to today's helpful research assistant. Today's research assistant, by the way, is AI tool Microsoft Copilot, who confidently declared the impact velocity, then helpfully suggested I ask it to write a poem about resilience in the style of Keats. I suppose that's progress of sorts. Clippy would have popped up in 1999 to say, "It looks like you've been hit by a golf ball. Would you like help writing a strongly worded letter to the club secretary?" The reliability of AI in these matters is about on par with asking Mystic Meg, or the bloke at the bar who claims to have done a physics once. To be clear here, there's no blame to assign. I was loitering on the edge of the 9th fairway, the other group had no line of sight, and so didn't shout the traditional warning of 4, presumably unaware there was a middle-aged man lurking near the rough like a confused pheasant. That rogue ball was actually the first of 3 to land in my general vicinity, like some deranged Titleist airstrike. The one that made contact bounced a few yards in front of me before ricocheting into my sternum. Had it bounced just a foot higher, I'd now be dictating this through a smoothie straw while a dentist quietly priced up a new conservatory. As it was, I simply collapsed like a bag of washing, winded and slightly stunned, and thankfully a couple of minutes later, I was able to dust myself off, apologise to the poor chap whose drive I'd intercepted, and then proceeded to play some of the best golf I managed in several months. Apparently, blunt force trauma is my warm-up routine. The only lingering souvenir, a deep purple bruise and a temporary tattoo that read tailor-made. Overall 0 out of 10 would not recommend. On with the show though, stage 4 of our virtual journey awaits. Virtual Insanity Stage 4, Fair Isle to Newark. Welcome aboard the Good Ship Metaphor as we continue our stately voyage through the United Kingdom's extremities. Stage 4 is less about where our feet land and more about what we drift past, a continuation of the nautical nosiness that defined Stage 3 and will bob merrily into Stage 5. Having waddled through Shetland like a puffin with shin splints, we now glide south through the Fair Isle Channel towards Orkney, casting westward glances at Fair Isle itself, then tracing the eastern Orkney chain like we're window shopping for isolation. Our watery route threads a gap between island groups, bringing us within gawking distance of some of Britain's most remote and delightfully peculiar outposts. Fair Isle, North Ronaldsay and Sandy. There's something oddly magical about ferrying through the North Sea, even from behind a screen. It may be the diesel fumes, but I'm more inclined to blame the heady mix of meteorological chaos, Spanish shipwrecks and sheep with a taste for seaweed. Pearl Harbor. Fair Isle stands like an exclamation point to Shetland and an apostrophe to Orkney, a punctuation mark in the North Sea about 40 kilometres south of Lerwick. Owned by the National Trust for Scotland since 1954, it's home to around 60 people and tens of thousands of puffins. It's also the site of the UK's most remote meteorological station, manned daily to confirm just how wind-battered you already feel. Officially part of Shetland, Fair Isle is a 5x3 kilometre speck that refuses to act its size. This tiny rock in the North Sea somehow squeezes in an airport, a world-famous bird observatory, and some of the most fiendishly complicated knitwear known to humankind. The Fair Isle Bird Observatory is a global hotspot for bird migration. Established in 1948 as a research base for studying seabird colonies and migratory patterns, it's long drawn ornithologists from around the world. Tragically, the original building was destroyed by fire in 2019, but after a 6-year community-led rebuild, the new observatory reopened in May 2025. Now fully operational, it offers accommodation, guided bird ringing sessions, and sightings that would make any twitcher weep with joy. Recent highlights include Savannah sparrow, Siberian rubythroat, and even a Blackburnian warbler. Yes, they are real birds, not minor characters from Pirates of the Caribbean. Fair Isle Chanel. Fair Isle is of course famed for its traditional knitting patterns, intricate multicoloured designs that shot to fame in the 1920s when the then Prince of Wales wore a Fair Isle jumper during a golfing photo op. Suddenly, everyone wanted a slice of the island's wardrobe, and that, dear listener, is how Pringle and Lyle and Scott were born. Not true, but feels right. A century on, even high-fashion houses couldn't resist muscling in, cheekily in this case. A local designer sold a handful of Fair Isle pieces to Chanel staff for research. Months later, her Jubilee-inspired black and white pattern strode down the catwalk in Rome, without so much as a nod of credit, though an apology eventually did follow. All of which allows me to make a joke about still being in the Fair Isle Chanel. So thank you, Karl Lagerfeld. Ship happens. No island stop is complete without a good shipwreck tale, and Fair Isle naturally delivers. In September 1588, El Gran Grifon, a Spanish Armada supply ship, ran aground at Strom's Helier, a spot that sounds like an aggressively intense Swedish metal band, but is in fact a jagged stretch of Fair Isle's coastline. The Grifon was already in a state, having scooped up stragglers from other doomed vessels. By the time she literally hit Fair Isle, she was carrying nearly 300 men, about the same as the entire population of the island at the time, puffins not included. Miraculously, around 250 survived the wreck and clambered ashore. The locals, instead of taking one look and saying absolutely not lads, actually put them up for over a month, sharing what little food they had before rescue arrived, setting a hospitality standard Airbnbs can only dream of. The wreck was rediscovered in the 1970s, along with ammunition, pottery and other artefacts now on display at the Shetland Museum in Lerwick. Today, a cairn marks the site, along with the slightly surreal realisation that a Spanish Armada ship really did wash up on the knitwear capital of Britain. The Lamshank Redemption. Swinging in a more easterly direction beneath Fair Isle, we skirt North Ronaldsay, the northernmost of the Orkneys and undisputed heavyweight champion of sheep-related folklore. And as the Velvets, Boomer, or Bananarama, Gen X, would agree, that's really saying something. Forget grass, on North Ronaldsay, the sheep eat seaweed. Thanks to a 13-mile dry stone wall built in 1832 to keep them away from inland crofts, the sheep were exiled to the beaches, where they now graze almost exclusively on seaweed. It's essentially an all-you-can-eat coastal buffet if it was sponsored by Itsu and frequented only by feral woolly mammals. This diet has triggered all sorts of digestive adaptations and apparently gives their meat a distinctive umami flavour. Think lamb with a maritime twist, if that doesn't put you off. Wool-wise, they're no slouches either. They have double-coated fleeces, which I guess is pretty understandable given their postcode. The sheep are so central to the island's identity that every July, North Ronaldsay hosts a sheep festival. A week-long celebration where volunteers help rebuild the ancient wall stone by stone, while enjoying workshops, storytelling and, presumably, the occasional sheep-themed quiz. It's conservation meets community with a side of kelp. The Lighthouse family. North Ronaldsay's main settlements are Ancompton and Hollinston. Ancompton's main draw is a bird observatory, where twitchers can tick off rare breeds while seals and the occasional killer whale glide past like they're auditioning for a nature documentary. Hollinston, meanwhile, is home to the North Ronaldsay Lighthouse. Built in 1854 by Alan Stevenson and standing at 42 metres, making it the tallest land-based lighthouse in the British Isles. Alan was part of the legendary Stevenson dynasty, who over several generations were responsible for planning, designing and building a vast network of lighthouses along the Scottish coast and beyond. Often known as the Lighthouse Stevensons, the family built over 100 lighthouses along Scotland's Ocean Drive, which always lifted sailor spirits. Okay, I'll stop now. The Fogfather. Leaving North Ronaldsay Island behind, Sandy drifts into view on the starboard side of our ferry. It's the third largest island in Orkney, covering some 28 square miles, and gets its name from the Old Norse Sande, which means sandy, because, well, I think you get the idea. Sandy's Bronze Age and Neolithic remnants are scattered across a landscape like an open-air time capsule, from the Quoinest chambered cairn to the Scar Viking boat burial. We drift past Sancoy, one of Sandy's many crofting hamlets, and then Northwall, once home to a wartime RAF base, and now boasting beaches so windswept and photogenic they resemble the opening shot of a Visit Scotland ad, the kind that makes you forget you're in a 50-mile-per-hour gale and it's raining sideways. At the southeastern tip of the island sits Start Point Lighthouse, perched on a tidal island and painted in striking vertical black and white stripes, looking like a Dalek going through a Tim Burton phase. Built in 1806 by Robert Stevenson, quelle surprise, it was the first in Scotland to feature a revolving light. We wrap up stage 4 just off Newark Bay, a stretch of coast with a knack for collecting shipwrecks. The standout, if that's the right word, is the Sandy Wreck, unearthed by storms in 2024 and named with all the excitement of a filing cabinet. Believed to be the Earl of Chatham, a former Royal Navy frigate that saw action during the American Revolutionary War before retiring as a whaler, it met its end in 1788 and now resides in a freshwater tank at the Sandy Heritage Centre, preserved like a pickled relic from a nautical episode of Antiques Roadshow. And that's that. More beaches, more puffins, more sheep, and still no sign of dry land. Spoiler alert, stage 5 doesn't help. See you next time.